It's an interesting analogy because at Soil Association we've been working on the dangers of antibiotic overuse of antibiotics in industrial livestock farming for about 15, 20
Actually,
years.
I totally agree with you on that one.
Yeah,
But one of the things we've learned is that you've got systems of livestock production, large indoor pig and poultry units, for example, and some very intensive dairying, where it's very difficult to avoid the use of antibiotics. And actually, as you remove the antibiotics, you make the whole system less viable, and you're more likely to move to free-range and outdoor systems, rather than, as we've seen equally, a trend in this country, a move towards wanting, huge mega dairies. And so in agriculture, when GM arrived, there was this conflict already in existence about whether you move to lower inputs, more environmentally sensitive farming, which tried to bring back some of our wildlife like grey partridges and skylarks, with more mixed farming, more livestock, more outdoor livestock. That was one move which was still losing out rapidly. And then there was the move to bigger and bigger units, more and more specialised, monocultures, livestock kept in huge factories, not integrated in farms and so on. And GM fitted into that
system. It's a pollution problem rather than a source of plant nutrition.
Yeah, exactly. And GM fitted into the latter, into the bigger and bigger, more and more specialised.
It doesn't have to
and
at all.
It didn't, but it did, and it drove that, helped drive it. And it's driven it in North America very strongly, and in Argentina, now in Brazil, and it's one of the reasons why Indian government is resisting GM so strongly, because the peasant farming, small farmers movements in India, with its cultural and political history, are much stronger than in a country like Argentina, and incomparably stronger than in the US or Canada. So you are seeing real moves to actually start to ban GM crops in India.
Okay, I'd like to come back with another point here, because I think that one of the in the minds of many people who are worried about it or opposed to it or think it shouldn't go ahead is this kind of idealism that farmers are the ultimate practice. They have to come up with what's the least bad solution. They're not interested in some ideal solution. What is the least bad way to control weeds? I mean, you'd accept that you have to control weeds. Yep. You can lose half your yield to weeds.
Well, with a minor qualification. But
okay, so it's not like herbicide use was invented when they started using Roundup Ready soy. They used some much nastier herbicides from American cyanamide, whose names I can't remember. But and the company went out of business basically. So what actually happened was not that huge amounts of new pesticides were applied, but rather an old and rather nasty pesticide, actually a couple of them that were rather difficult to apply without killing the crop, were replaced by an insecticide, sorry, a herbicide that's rapidly inactivated in the soil. And has absolutely no collateral damage to animals or to watercourses. So it's less bad. I'm not in love with Monsanto or anything, but it's actually less bad to use Roundup Ready than the technology that preceded it.
Depending on there are again some scientific dispute about how safe Roundup is, and whether it's safe, and particularly whether the other things which you use to deliver the Roundup.
It's clearly less unsafe than many other herbicides.
It's unsafe than others, which is, you could argue, is not saying much. But the thing that GM has done is introduce a very widespread use of these things. So you get Roundup sprays over hundreds of thousands of square miles, and you get BT crops over similar areas. So you do get this resistance problem building up very quickly. And I want to come back to you on no weeds, because actually in organic farming, the goal is certainly you don't want weeds which will compete really seriously with the crops. On my own farm, creeping thistle and couch grass are two organic weed problems we have to try and get rid of or control. But actually what we do want in our cereals is a good mix of low-growing weeds, because they provide feed for insects, and particularly for things like ladybirds and lacewings, which are predators of aphids. So we're looking actually for an agricultural ecosystem which has a big variety of plants in it, including the crop, because that will give us a variety of insects, which will stop us getting the aphid outbreaks, which occur in non-organic crops, and you have to spray for. So it's a bit more complicated than that.
Well, I'm all for experiments to address, how credible that proposition is in side-by-side comparison.
Well, yes, you need. I mean, you need to check to compare the system. You need to look at an organic system, what it delivers over usually 8, maybe 10-year rotation, because it's a complex thing. The other thing I wanted to come back to was no, I've forgotten that. What it was. You better have another go.
Okay, well, I'm just going to stay on weeds.
Okay.
You may have butted heads with our local MEP, Stuart Agnew, I don't know, but one thing he's said to me, which I think is, you have to take seriously, is there's substantial...
I can't think anything about UKIP, seriously.
About farming. There are substantial numbers of farms where you can't grow wheat because of blackgrass. So if you had a Roundup Ready wheat, you could actually grow wheat where you can't grow it now.
Okay, it's an interesting one, because we don't have blackgrass up in northwest Norfolk, but we have wild oats, which came in in the 60s. They weren't as significant, and we actually saw them moving across the farm. They came from the west, zoomed on the wind.
Peter, you're obviously
let me just switch to the wild oats thing, because one of the things that really surprised me about going organic was our wild oat problem didn't disappear, but it became far less significant. And blackgrass and wild oats, I think there's quite a bit of evidence, sterile brome, 3 major weeds of modern cereal farming, are weeds of nitrogen fertiliser and of continuous cereals. And actually, another way of doing it, apart from spraying everything with Roundup, is to have a rotation where you've got a mix of crops and a lay of fertility building break, which will produce food for livestock and so on. And that does seem to... We had one field really bad wild oats this year, but the rest of it we can hand row with a couple of people in a few days. It's not a significant problem. So it's interesting how much of the problems of modern agriculture, maybe, and not all of them of course, the problems of excess or the high levels of nitrogen and phosphate.
Yes, quite possible.
No, I subscribe to that. I mean, and Martin Wolf, who has an interesting experimental farm in Suffolk, so his point is that weed control is actually more difficult in modern wheat varieties because they're dwarf varieties. And so the taller varieties can actually crowd out the weeds better. But on the other hand, the dwarf varieties do give you more yield because they put less carbohydrate into the stalk and they don't fall over. And of course, falling over is disease of over nitrogen in part. But they put more carbohydrate into the seed, and so you get more yield.
You get more yield per hectare, but not necessarily more yield per ton of input per hectare.
Yeah.
Particularly as the dwarf varieties, when they're very even and thick, are very susceptible to fungal disease. So you have to spray sometimes several times with fungicides.
Yes, it's not the dwarfness that makes them.
Well, it's the closeness of the crop and the heaviness of the crop and the lack of room for air to circulate. So
that's true. So a lot of yield actually is due to plants that can tolerate more overcrowding than their grandparents.
And what you find, in an organic system where you've got the crop tends to be a bit uneven, it's more widely spaced because it's a lower yield. Even in a year like this, which was an appalling year for fungal disease in cereals.
Great year for lake blight, actually, for my lake blight resistance trial, which stood up beautifully.
Well, we found in organic systems with potatoes that, I haven't seen figures for this year yet, but the last really wet potato year we had, when we saw articles in the farming press saying, all organic potatoes would have failed.
That was 07 or something.
Yeah, we did a bit of work and looked at what our licensees and soil association had done, and only 30% had used sulphur to try and control blight. The rest hadn't used anything at all.
Is that what they're growing sulphur?
I think there are some better blight-resistant varieties than those, but yes, there are certainly one. But I can't remember them, I'm not a potato grower, but there are 2 or 3 newer varieties where the taste and cooking
properties are better.
But there are blight-resistant, naturally blight-resistant varieties.
Not naturally they were bred.
Sorry?
Not naturally they were bred, I said.
Well,
What does natural mean, non-GM?
well, non-GM, yes, sorry. They were bred, but they're not GM. You don't need to use that term. Can I ask you a question, Tom?
Sure.
One of the things that's preoccupying those of us who are opposed to GM in the last few months has been a ballot in California about whether GM food should be labelled or not. And I think I saw the other day you saying something to the effect that you
You've been
thought...
following my tweets.
Yeah, I couldn't be following Twitter, I'm afraid, but somebody repeated
Get my fellow
it. That, you know, we should end up with everything probably having GM except organic.
Yeah.
Which probably, I think, would mean that organic farming would see a huge resurgence and success and
Well,
continuing
why would you oppose
growth.
that?
Well, because I have an interest in, for example, it might went organic because I was concerned about wildlife and my grey pastures. And the one large-scale farm trial that's ever been done in this country of GM crops showed they would be worse for biodiversity overall rather than better.
Can I comment on that specifically?
Yeah.
I mean, so what it showed was that herbicides kill weeds, and we sort of knew that before. So
Sorry,
it showed that herbicides kill weeds.
Yes.
So you could actually you have more effective weed control. If you have more effective weed control, you have less diversity of plants.
GM crops
and
allowed that.
Yeah. So the question is, what I think it really comes back to the question of what kind of farming we want. Do we want to control weeds? I mean, actually, Peter's made an interesting argument why you may not want to control weeds as much as you may think you should.
Yeah.
But if you except for 1 second, for the sake of argument, the proposition that we want to control weeds, then GM crops and GM weed resistance works until they evolve resistance.
The reason I don't is because I remember as a kid on our farm, when I was about 11 years old, being shown by the gamekeeper, we had a gamekeeper then, a group of grey partridge chicks lying dead in the field. And the gamekeeper said, it hasn't rained in Ascot week or Henley week or something or other, well, they did in those days, so these chicks have died of thirst. But in fact, I've read Silent Spring 50 years, this year since it was published, later and realised they'd died because there were no insects, they'd starved to death.
Mm.
And the insects depend on a variety of plants. You can't get a good insect population on an arable farm if you don't have some native plants or weeds in the crop, as well as places from low winter and so on. So I want to see some wild plants on arable farms in the fields, so that species like grey partridges and skylarks, where the young depend on live insects to survive.
Yeah, me
For
too.
them to survive.
That's fine. But
So
I
we
think they should
don't
be
want
on.
the herbicides.
Well, no, I think they should be
Roundup.
on in the hedgerows, or they should be
Well,
in
the
the.
partridges unfortunately live in the middles of fields,
Okay.
as certainly do skylarks and corn buntings and so on. So you know, we have an ecology on farmland in this country. We've been farming for thousands of years, where a lot of our birds and insect species and even mammals like hares have evolved with farming.
Yes.
And it's only really since the Second World War that farming has taken such a radical shift in direction that we've started to lose those in huge numbers. I mean, losses of 95, 98%, fairly common in many farming species. But let me get back to the question I was going to ask you. So we've been preoccupied by this ballot in America, which was overshadowed a bit by some other election that was going on at the time. But it was defeated quite closely. So I was thinking of President Obama's victory. And it was defeated after
53 to 47.
Yeah, and $50 million spent to about $7 million in opposing this ballot, which was asking that GM food should be labelled, as it has to be by law in Europe and Japan and several other countries. And I wondered why, as I took it, your repeated tweet, you didn't agree.
So my position is that although people talk about free choice, there's no such thing as a free choice. It actually costs money to provide a choice, and to set up, a separate labelling scheme often a delivery system to try and keep the GM and non-GM separate, law fees when lawyers sue people for something proclaimed as GM free when it's not, or vice versa. It is complete waste of money to keeping separate two things that by any rational criteria are exactly the same.
That's a very good answer, isn't it?
No.
Come on, tell us why.
Well, first of all, this is going to have a lawyer's paradise, was an argument used in these very expensive and very misleading advertising campaign in California. If they'd looked at Europe, I think they would have found that there'd been virtually no legal cases at all about
There's
GM.
hardly any GM food.
Well,
There's
not
been
if you
one
listen.
there's been one about honey.
Listen to the GM industry. For a while, there was quite a few
That's
GM
GM,
crops.
yeah.
GM crops being
Yes.
grown in Europe.
They've been fed on GM crops.
There have been GM maize in France, GM maize in northern Spain.
That's true.
France then disappeared
There's
off
the-
the sort of list of countries that were in existence because they stopped growing maize.
The French government decided to stop French farmers from
Yeah.
planting it, much to the annoyance of French farmers. That's certainly
Well,
true.
to a small number of French farmers,
Well,
but to the joy of many, I would say.
The Spanish farmers are very happy to be continuing to grow it, and the Portuguese, and
But
it's growing.
Jonathan, the fundamental thing, it seemed to me, was that this, and it's been true of much of British agriculture, and I think it's been a bad thing in the post-war period, that we've operated as an industry as if we, the producers, decided what should happen, and the customers could lump it. And we could do that for most of the post-war period because of the very high levels of public subsidy, ironically. We could then ignore the public and their demands. So if you look at the way food is advertised, and still advertised, it represents an image of farming which really, very rarely exists in practice.
Yeah,
Nobody
that's quite
sells
true.
food on the basis of here's a 500-acre field of wheat and it's been in wheat for 10 years and you've never seen
No, it's all bucolic images.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now most industries sell products because they look at what customers want, or they think they can encourage customers to want, and they produce products with that in mind. In agriculture, we've tended to, and I think it's been a terrible thing for the industry, to say, this is what we can do, this is what suits us. It suits us to burn straw, it suits us to rip out hedges, it suits us to drain wetlands. It would suit us, incidentally, to drain the Broads if we hadn't been stopped by campaigners, who the same people now campaigning against GM are campaigning to save the Broads. And that attitude of a disregard and disrespect and willingness to ignore what the public want, what our customers want, is a bizarre way for any set of businesses to behave. And I was disappointed to see you apparently encouraging that. To hell with them. What's it matter what they want? If they want it labelled, just ignore it.
No,
Because it might cost them money. Well, they, the public, our customers can decide
if
that.
they wanted it labelled, then they'd have voted for it, I guess.
Well, watch this space. There are 20 states in America where labelling legislation is going through or on its way. And I think, you can defeat people by force sometimes, but it tends to be a temporary victory. If you overwhelm people, as they did in California, with huge millions and millions of pounds worth of money.
It would have added to food costs. The material that they were attempting to distinguish between was, by any rational criteria, indistinguishable.
Well, that's one view of the science, but only one view, and it relies on this. What now the scientists, even in the US Federal Drug Administration, some of the scientists say was a flawed idea that GM crops and non-GM crops are substantially equivalent. This way in which GM food has been allowed to get through regulation without having to go through the sort of tests that a new medicine or pesticide will.
I mean, do you realise that two different maize inbreds, one maize inbred has 20% of the genes that are in it are not in the other one? I mean, the diversity between maize inbreds is as large as the diversity between humans and chimpanzees.
So when GM
So the
genetic
so
engineering,
we get to the end of the argument. So you've got this incredible difference between inbred lines, so that breeders are just crossing all the time and
Yep.
moving things around the world, and so to fetishize an anxiety about a single gene, two genes that you put in that do a defined job, that there is no credible mechanism for being problematic, is just. It doesn't make any sense, any scientific sense. Now, if you want to have a discussion about what kind of farming we want, and this is where I do agree that we have many shared concerns. I'm not happy at the prospect. So let me paint a nightmare GM scenario for you.
We should have nightmares now.
Right,
paint away.
You have your 10,000 hectares,
Yeah.
and it's got BT, and it's got weed control. And there's absolutely nothing else living in that 10,000 hectares at all. That to me is a kind of agricultural practice that I'm not enthusiastic about.
No, of course not.
But you can do it with chemicals. Don't get hung up on the GM side of things. Let's have a discussion about the kind of agriculture we want. I'm not. There's 7 billion of us. There's going to be 9 billion of us. We want to share the planet with other species. Humans intercept like 30 or 40% of total terrestrial photosynthesis for ourselves and our domestic animals. Never in history has any species been so selfish.
Yeah.
It's appalling. It simply is appalling, as somebody has once said. But I think that using GM is going with the grain of nature to reduce the impact of our agriculture on the environment. So if you can put a blight-resistant potato in the field that does meet market needs more than the existing blight-resistant varieties do, and avoid the need for spraying 18 times a year or whatever it is, all the tractor journeys up and down, etc., etc. Less CO2 emissions. Surely that's better than not doing it, because you may say organic farmers can just plant Maris piper or Sarpo Myro or its more recent improvements, but I'm sorry, that's not going to be more than 5% of the agriculture. So if you want
it's not going to be
more than 5% of the agriculture. So if you Rudolf Barrow of East Germany used to refer to the difference between ideal communism or socialism and actually existing socialism. Actually existing agriculture is an agriculture where you could reduce its impact by putting in a few genes that mean less insecticide, less fungicide, and less tractor trips.
Which must be
got to be a
good,
But if that happened, and that was exactly the claim that was made.